Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about what's happening in the city.
Wisconsin voters will be choosing a new justice for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court this year. The April 7th election comes after elections in 2023 and 2025 that altered the ideological makeup of the court, giving liberal-leaning justices the majority. The ideological makeup will not be influenced by this election, but that doesn't mean the race won't have a long-term impact on how big cases are decided in Wisconsin. WUWM's Maayan Silver is joined by Barry Burden, politics professor and director of the Elections Research Center at UW-Madison, to find out what's at stake in this election.
Well, each seat on the court is important because it's a 10-year term. So even if the balance of the court doesn't shift from one ideological side to another this year, the person who's elected could serve potentially for another 10 years, and the politics of the state might be very different later in that term, and the balance of the court might be very different. So it does contribute to the makeup of the court now, but also future compositions of the court when the other justices may be different people.
And both Taylor and Lazar are appellate court judges currently, yet the court's role is to decide significant or new legal questions rather than to take appeals on, more routine civil or criminal cases. What do we know about the candidates and their abilities to step up to this role?
Well, they both look like credible candidates. They, have judicial experience and law degrees and have worked in government for a while in different roles, one in the Attorney General's office, one in the state legislature. That makes them, I think, more comparable to one another than we have seen in some other years, where sometimes there's a candidate who has a lot of experience on the bench and another who has come from some other place. So that's sort of, I think, in the minds of voters, probably a neutralizing effect. There's not really a difference between them in that. On that side of things, and probably puts more attention on their personal orientations towards politics, the kinds of things they care about, the way they think about the law, rather than just experience.
Back in 2010, talking about the issues and the cases that will be coming before this court or are likely to come before the court, back in 2010, then Governor Scott Walker orchestrated a signature labor law called Act 10. It significantly curtailed the ability of public employees to form unions and collectively bargain. An appeal on that issue is expected to come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. What's at stake here?
Well, this has been such a central issue to Wisconsin politics for 15 years now, the rights of public sector workers to organize and collectively bargain for wages and other benefits. It's been a battle, and I think it's really tainted party politics in the state legislature and transformed the way politics works in Wisconsin. It's amazing that this is still being dealt with in the courts, but there is a significant case that the Supreme Court is likely to resolve fairly soon that might restore some rights to workers and undo some important parts of that act. This may not be the last word, which is another reason for voters to care about this election. But I think it's a sign of just the central importance of our state Supreme Court in wading into some of the biggest, most contentious issues that the two other branches of government aren't able to resolve on their own.
And are you able to share anything you know about the candidates' views on Act 10?
Well, I think it's pretty clear they differ on their views about the role of public sector unions. Lazar worked in an administration close to Scott Walker, and I think would be supportive of that kind of legislation. Neither of the candidates will state their views openly on a matter that could come before the court, but that seems likely what her orientation would be. Chris Taylor has been backed by some labor unions in this race and would probably be supportive of, personally, of seeing some parts of the act be taken down. But I think both of them would pledge to be open-minded and to hear the evidence if a case like that came before them. So neither is going to prejudge the case, and we shouldn't, expect for certain how they will come down. The justices will surprise us at times.
Some of the big cases before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in recent years have involved election law. A narrowly divided court rejected President Donald Trump's lawsuit in 2020 to disqualify more than 200,000 ballots from Dane and Milwaukee counties. There's been litigation on absentee ballot drop boxes. Is there anything, do you expect anything to be waiting in the wings for the court on this topic?
Well, there are two cases waiting in the wings at the moment that deal with redistricting. There are two cases asking for the 8 congressional districts to be redrawn for different legal reasons under the state constitution. Those are likely to get back to the state Supreme Court and be decided sometime soon, probably not soon enough for this year's midterm elections to be affected. But that's just, I think, one example of things that may be coming their way. It would not be surprising to see lawsuits again around absentee ballots, around voter registration, around non-citizens voting and the voter registration rolls and requirements to become registered, given the salience of that issue nationally and Republicans concerned about it. So it seems unlikely that the court's going to be able to dodge election questions. Those just keep coming their way, and we should expect them to.
This is Lake Effect. You're tuned in to WUWM Radio. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with Barry Burden, Director of the Elections Research Center and Politics Professor at UW-Madison. And on redistricting in particular, just to remind people, since 2010, state legislative maps drawn by Republicans built pretty large GOP majorities in our state legislature. In 2023, the liberal-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court overturned those maps and ordered that new district boundary maps could be drawn for the state legislature. You mentioned that congressional redistricting that question might not be resolved before the midterms, but what do you say are the chances of Democrats taking control of the state Senate or Assembly under these new maps in 2026?
Well, the maps are certainly more competitive since they've been redrawn. The Assembly maps were used in the last election in 2024, and Democrats picked up about 10 seats. So it's now about a 10-seat margin between the two, and within striking distance for Democrats to get a majority there. I wouldn't say it's likely that Democrats flip the Assembly because there are a lot of Republican incumbents who are likely to be reelected. But it's a possibility in a way that it has not been for the Democrats in a decade and a half. The state Senate is probably within closer grasp. Those new districts were used in 2024, but only for half of the seats that were up that year. Those seats are staggered, and now the other half are going to be up in 2026. And some of those Republican incumbents are facing voters they've never faced before because they're using new districts for the first time. There are at least 3 of those districts that Kamala Harris won in 2024 that are held by Republicans. So I think Democrats have a better shot at winning the Senate. But I think really any possibility could happen in a state like ours. It may be that one party pulls off victories in both chambers or they end up split. None of those would be surprising outcomes.
So that's, potential impacts of redistricting and what the state Supreme Court rules or does not rule on those topics. In 2025 also, and definitely in 2023 as well, abortion was a huge topic that was going to be coming before the state Supreme Court. In 2025, it ruled that an 1849 law doesn't ban abortion in the state. It's now available up to 20 weeks. Before that decision, experts deemed the 2023 and 2025 races for the court as some of the most important races on the issue of abortion in the country. What does it mean for the 2026 and future elections now that issue has been decided?
Yeah, that was really a source of energy in those races because the Dobbs decision from the U.S. Supreme Court had just been handed down, and it really did change the experience on the ground in Wisconsin because abortion had been available at several clinics in the state and was immediately stopped the week that the Dobbs decision was handed down. So I think it had a bite or a concreteness in Wisconsin that the decision did not have in many other states. But now that has mostly worked its way through the system. The Supreme Court has weighed in. Abortion services have been restored at least a couple of those clinics. So the court has, I think the focus of the court and these Supreme Court elections has moved on to other things. As we mentioned already, Act 10 and public sector union rights, redistricting and election laws. I think there are some issues related to K through 12 education that are bubbling up around the state that may come back to the court. There are always issues of environmental regulation and the rights of businesses and water quality and other kinds of things. So it's always a full docket for the Supreme Court, and I think more important issues are now ending up there than in the past because the lawmaking branches of government, the governor and the state legislature, often can't cooperate to produce laws and get things done. And so, parties end up litigating instead and bringing things to the court.
The court never took up the question of whether there's a constitutional right to an inherent right to an abortion via, equal protection and a right to privacy that would inherently provide a right to an abortion. That question was never taken up by the court. Do you anticipate that maybe that or other additional litigation on the issue of abortion could be taken up by the court in the future?
There could be other cases dealing with abortion or reproductive rights in various ways. And that's another reason for voters to pay attention to this race. Although conservatives are not going to take control of the court this year, it's just not mathematically possible. It is possible for the liberals to grow their majority from the current 4-3 mix to a 5-2 mix if Taylor were to beat Lazar. That might encourage litigants, groups that want to bring suits where they think where they favor a progressive answer to the question. It might encourage them to bring more cases to the court if they feel as though they've got a 5-seat majority there and even losing a justice would still let them prevail on some important cases. We might see more litigation pushing in a progressive direction with a larger progressive majority. So I think the kinds of things that precisely come up as complaints before the court depend in part on whether the liberals make a gain this year or we end up holding with the current 4-3 mix.
And are you able to elaborate a little bit on the K-12? I know there's the 400-year veto that Evers did, which would increase school funding limits for the next 400 years. What else are you watching for when it comes to K-12 education?
It seems as though there are both funding issues and some policy issues in the schools that could find their way back to the Supreme Court. There is the veto power of the governor and the funding formula for schools. There was just a case filed in Eau Claire trying to force the state legislature to provide more generous and more equitable funding to school districts around the state. That could end up being a Supreme Court case. There are a variety of lower-level disputes and cases around the state dealing with gender and trans rights in schools and what kinds of policies the schools can have in terms of students' use of pronouns and other kinds of treatments of issues in schools or in curricula. Those could end up being cases that come back to the Supreme Court. So I think there's a whole range of things related to K-12 education that are not likely to go away. So many things that really matter to people, day-to-day lives, will end up before these justices.
Barry Burton, politics professor with UW-Madison, thank you so much for speaking to me about this.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Barry Burden is a politics professor and director of the Elections Research Center at UW-Madison. He spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver. You can find more information about the upcoming elections at WUWM.com in our voter guide. And you can learn more about the state Supreme Court race in new bonus episodes of WUWM's podcast, Swing State of the Union. Those episodes will drop March 18th and 25th.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Lake Effect is WUWM's talk show all about what's happening in the city. If you want to hear more conversations like this, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast, and you'll hear highlights from the show. If you want to hear the full show, it's on the radio at noon, Monday through Friday, on 89.7. That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.